announcement from the chair of the party of the left. Chair. I have, but it's not.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the party of the left debated resolve reason over religion. We chose reason. And with the Federalist Party, the party of the left debating resolve the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. in the chapel room of the University.
The chair is thanked. Is there perhaps an appropriate announcement from the chair of the Progressive Party? Chair.
Last week, the Progressive Party honored our seniors by debating resolve. We also joined the Tory Party for a joint debate, which says that we will have. And this week, the Progressive Party will hold a closed caucus.
Chair is thanked. Is there perhaps an appropriate announcement from the chairman of the Independent Party?
For the announcement,
Chairman.
Last week, the Independent Party gathered to debate, resolve, embrace consumerism. We shall not. Next week, tomorrow, at 7 p.m., 53 Wall Street, the Independent Party will be debating, resolve, great American novel.
Chairman is thanked. Is there perhaps an appropriate announcement from the proxy to the chairman of the Federalist Party?
For the announcement. Last week, the Federalist Party had a closed caucus. This Friday at 8:15 p.m. in the Benjamin Franklin Common Room, the Federalist Party will be debating resolve, join the Sons of Liberty.
Is there perhaps an appropriate announcement from the chairman of the Conservative Party?
The proxy.
Proxy.
Last week, the Conservative Party debated resolve that America is an idea. It is. A closed caucus.
The proxy is thanked. Is there perhaps an appropriate announcement from the chairman of the Tory Party?
For the proxy.
Proxy.
Last week, the Tory Party debated politicized music with the Progressive Party. We shall. This week, on Thursday at 8 p.m. in the Bradford Trumbull Room, the Tory Party shall be debating order over freedom with our petitioners. You are invited to come. Thank you.
Is there perhaps a final appropriate announcement from the chairman of the party? Last week, the party resolved that nothing is not.
For the announcement.
Members, friends, and Hasanabi Twitch subscribers. Welcome to this evening's historic event. I am Morsa Bashir Jr. at Yale College, and I am the 184th president of the Yale Political Union. The union is the largest and oldest intercollegiate debate society in America. Every Tuesday, we host a prominent guest speaker and debate them on the most controversial issues of our day. We exist to subject every idea, especially our own, to the discipline of serious opposition. We stand as one of the only firm bastions of free speech in American higher education. As such, I would like to remind everyone that we host speakers when we hosted New York mayoral candidate Curtis Fleetwood. I stood on this very stage at this very podium and proclaimed that I can say without a shred of doubt that I have never seen this level of excitement for a guest of the Yale Political Union. Mr. Speaker, that distinction was perhaps short-lived. Tonight, I am honored to declare, again without a shred of doubt, that I have never seen such a high demand to attend a Yale Political Union debate as we are witnessing today. Over 10% of Yale College students attempted to secure a ticket. Importantly, our event is currently being live streamed to tens of thousands of viewers worldwide. If any of those viewers or anyone in the audience would like to stay updated on the Yale Political Union's activity, they can follow our Instagram at yale.political.union. It is now my distinct honor to introduce our guest for this evening's debate. Mr. Hasan Piker is one of the most prominent progressive voices in American media. Known for bringing politics out of traditional studios and into the immediacy of live streams. He has built a massive following, over 3 million subscribers on Twitch and almost 2 million on YouTube, reaching viewers worldwide. His streams cover everything from elections and foreign policy to labor and internet culture, often driving the broader political conversation. Before becoming an independent commentator, Mr. Piker was a host and producer at The Young Turks, helping shape a new generation of online political media. He is a graduate of Rutgers University. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that Yale is committed to protecting free expression and peaceful dissent. Interfering with a speaker's ability to speak and the audience's ability to hear and see is not consistent with the university's free expression policy. Please note that Mr. Piker will give opening remarks, and after just 5 brief student speeches, he will deliver some closing remarks as well. Audience members are required to stay for the duration of the entire event. Hundreds of people had to be turned away from this evening's event, so it is disrespectful and in fact an expression of the antithesis of our mission, which is to debate, if attendees leave early. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that the Yale Political Union debate resolve end the American Empire.
Is there perhaps a first documented speech in the affirmative? For the speech.
This is going to pick me up, right? Everyone can hear me? All right. Just want to start off by thanking everybody for allowing me to come to Yale University today and be able to deliver a speech on one of my favorite subjects, U.S. empire. I know that it was quite contentious, it seems, that there were a lot of people that didn't want me to come here today and speak to all of you. That's right. I know what that means now. I want to start off by thanking the Yale Union. I'm especially sad that Senator Rick Scott couldn't make it. Sure, he had many opinions on whether or not we should end the U.S. empire and the global capitalist system, which is what I will be talking about today. And then your grandparents are probably going to hear about it on Fox News tomorrow. But it's an interesting resolution, end the U.S. empire. It's interesting because how do you end something that's already in the process of dying? Because that's the situation with the American empire as it stands today. The empire of the United States was born in the Spanish-American War and rose to the position of global superpower during World War II. People are hissing World War II. That's crazy. That was a good one that we fought. Sure, you can trace America's imperial roots to killing and stealing from the Native Americans or to the Mexican-American War, but America's status as a transoceanic power came with the dawn of the 20th century. After the Second World War, the American empire was in a time of expansion. We benefited greatly from our distance from the damage to the war itself. We hadn't suffered the terrible losses that our allies did, like in the USSR, with more than 20 million slain, defeating the Nazi scourge. But the Axis powers had been defeated. But the United States, fueled by anti-communist fervor, turned against its former ally, the Soviet Union. This next phase of the American empire was structured as a world competition between Washington and Moscow. Everywhere the United States looked, it found communists under the floorboards, under the beds, both real and imagined. And naturally, this anti-communist struggle went hand in hand with American imperial interest. From Europe to East Asia, the interests of our investors and our corporations were protected, and protected unconditionally, mind you. And rather than start converting our swords into plowshares, at the end of World War II, we dropped atom bombs, 2 of them to be exact, to show the rest of the world that we had that capacity to change the tides of history in an irreparable manner. We helped out Nazi and Japanese war criminals. We got into a hot war in Korea where we used the information that we got from those pardoned Japanese war criminals, chemical and biological warfare on Korea. And we began this long-term worldwide Cold War. In other words, we became the monsters that we had supposedly vanquished. What Americans call the Cold War was, to most of the people on the planet, an endless series of butcheries, each more perverse and more tragic than the last. In Korea, the United States dropped 635,000 tons of bombs. By comparison, the United States dropped 500 tons of bombs in the entire Pacific theater in World War II. The United States and its allies destroyed Korea, cut the peninsula into 2, built up an anti-communist dictatorship in the southern half, and have maintained a 75-year economic war against the northern half. Global American aggression during this period, however, was not limited to the military. Sometimes we used covert operations to take out socialist governments, replacing them with our favorite clients. This was exceptionally effective in the Third World, where the American empire went into overdrive. Take the case of Chiquita. Some of you might be familiar with this company. Today, it's one of the world's biggest food companies. But once upon a time, it was called the United Fruit Company. And for a decade, the United Fruit Company worked as kind of a state within a state in Guatemala. All resources in the country, land, labor, transportation, you name it, were mobilized in service of United Fruit and its investors. Essentially, there was no part of the state left uncaptured by United Fruit. But a left-wing government came into power in Guatemala. After a 1944 revolution, and this socialist government pursued, trigger warning for all the capitalists in here, land reform. To make matters worse, they tried to break U.S. corporate control over their land and to reappropriate it to Guatemala's vast peasantry. To make it even scarier, they also reformed the labor code, giving the power to strike to the workers on United Fruit's plantations. But Uncle Sam had different plans. That was far too much. I should point out that the American Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, you might be aware of this person, had previously been United Fruit's corporate lawyer. Now, he was in a position to back them up. In 1954, the CIA organized a coup d'etat in Guatemala. They did this by isolating Guatemala diplomatically, punishing it economically, cutting off weapons purchases, and when Guatemala was weakened, the CIA organized an army in exile to finish the job and to throw out the socialist government. The CIA drew up a list of dozens of communists to be killed by assassination. Guatemala has suffered in poverty and violence for most of its history since then. Now, many people have rightfully wondered, what was the point of defeating the Nazis if we went on to dominate so much of the globe as violently as we have? Was the point of all of it so that we could have the rest of the world to ourselves? The Guatemalan president, Juan Jose Arevalo, delivered a speech at the height of the American pressure campaign that kind of channels that exact same question. Before the coup d'etat, he said these words, and I think those words still ring true today. He said, and I quote, "The war that began in 1939 ended, but in the ideological dialogue between the two worlds and two leaders, Roosevelt lost the war. The real victor was Adolf Hitler. It is my personal opinion that the contemporary world is moved by the ideas that served as the foundation on which Hitler rose to power." 70 years later, I think history has proven Arevalo right. In place after place, time after time, the United States can never settle down its imperial bloodlust, this forever hunt for manifest destiny. We can draw a straight line from indigenous massacres of the early United States to the 20th century, killing fields that we have created in the third world. Hi. In Vietnam, we continued France's colonial war for decades, tearing society apart at home for pretty much no strategic gain abroad. In Iran, we spent the 1970s, sending the brutal Shah's regime billions of dollars of weapons, only for those same weapons to fall into the hands of the Islamic Revolutionary Government in '79, our new and heavily armed worse enemies. Worse enemies that kept propping up over and over again. Enemies that we designed sometimes because they simply wanted to have dignity and sovereignty. The story keeps repeating itself over and over again. We didn't do much better with Iraq, where we spent the 1980s arming Saddam before invading and then sanctioning Iraq into destitution. We wielded Iraq as a weapon against Iran as well at that point. All that before we actually invaded and just straight up broke the country in 2003. I can go on and on and on. And we celebrated the fall of the Soviet Union, cheering on its destruction, which plummeted millions and millions of people into an economic disaster, the consequences of which we still see today. At Zoran Mamdani's election victory night party, I was interviewed by a media outlet where I said, we defeated the USSR and the USSR dissolved, unfortunately. This was quite the controversial statement at the time. Fox News still loves repeating this soundbite. And some Democrats also channel that frustration as well. They say, how dare you, Hasan? The USSR was our enemy. They were ruthless, authoritarian. The fall of the USSR was one of the greatest catastrophes of the 20th century. Just wait, listen, maybe you'll agree. Not only was there incalculable harm done to every single country under its banner, child prostitution, skyrocketing suicide rates, life expectancy plummeting. But America was no longer contested around the globe. And it is precisely because of the end to that multipolarity that we saw accelerated neoliberalism that is devastating every Western nation right now. Unlimited and unchecked greed. Our successes are leading to our own demise and the demise and collapse of the liberal system. The U.S. has produced disaster after disaster after disaster. I am reminded, however, of some famous words spoken by a guy by the name of Mao Zedong. Speaking with an American journalist in 1946, Mao Zedong said these words: all reactionaries are paper tigers. In appearance, the reactionaries are terrifying. But in reality, they are not so powerful. Speaking of U.S. imperialism, people seem to feel that it is terrifically strong. But it will be proved that the U.S. reactionaries, like all reactionaries in history, do not have much strength. In the United States, there are others who are really strong. The American people. I think about that quote quite a bit, especially in these last couple of weeks as Operation Epstein's Fury wages on. Perhaps Mao was right about this, but maybe he was a little too early. After all, being a leftist is about being right, but too early. I'll revisit that quote in a little bit. I want to talk about another great man, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. You might know him as Lenin. It was Lenin who described imperialism as the highest or newest stage of capitalism. Successful imperialist powers, he observed, allowed their citizens to benefit from the exploitation of their colonies. But the system was unstable. The development of imperial economies was uneven. The colonies were a way of sending surplus capital and people into new markets. In the 1960s, Kwame Nkrumah, the African socialist who served as Ghana's first president, updated Lenin's theory with his own book on neocolonialism. What he described was how, in the era of decolonization under American hegemony, colonialism actually endured. Through many different ways, foreigners were still able to dominate notionally independent countries like the Congo or Colombia. To give an example, say an African country nationalizes its oil reserves, but unfortunately, they don't own or operate their own domestic refineries. Or maybe they don't even have domestic refineries at all. Say that African nation decides to take a closer look at the Western capital-backed contracts. What do you think happens? All of a sudden, armed militancy and uprisings prop up left and right. Instability is born out of nowhere. Now, those militants might not wear a NASCAR jacket that says Shell Corporation, but that doesn't change the reality that those militancies oftentimes are working for the same exact interests. So there's the visible forms of intervention, rendered invisible through the covert actions of the State Department, but then there's the more complex forms of economic imperialism through a financial infrastructure that Western capital has built to benefit its own interests, offering loans through the IMF only to cycle that wealth back to foreign capital. It's one of many ways. Loans that come with tremendous restrictions like austerity. Money that is handed over to developing nations that are only allowed to be spent in ways that generate returns for foreign investors. And to think all of that debt in the third world that is owed to financial institutions in wealthy countries, whether it's Goldman Sachs or the IMF, capital does not go to those who most need it. This has been, with, of course, substantial updates, the system of global exploitation that has endured for decades. And it has been facilitated by the United States, which, after so many disasters, is now running out of energy to hold this system together. There are no more big enemies left that the United States can beat. And after an empire destroys all of its enemies, it turns the gun on itself. After all of this plunder is not necessarily done for you. It's done for parasitic international capital. And parasitic capital has no loyalty to ethnicities, religions, nationalities, but only to the almighty dollar, only to the profit motive. Although critics have been pointing out the decline of American imperial power for decades, I'm certainly one of those critics, we've never seen the decline happen so quickly. And we have never had this much obvious evidence for it. The mini-Trumps around the world, like Viktor Orban, they're not doing so hot. They're not doing great. As the Ukraine war heads to a settlement that will be unfavorable to NATO, the United States and Europe are fighting over Greenland and Benjamin Netanyahu. And speaking of Benjamin Netanyahu, some might say the real president, a man with great ambition, constantly trying to get America to become more active in waging war with Iran for multiple decades. Well, he found the perfect guy to do it with. Donald Trump let the Israelis drag the U.S. into this newest war with Iran after 3 years of bipartisan support for the genocide that Israel was committing on a different front of Israel's multiple ongoing wars of aggression. While Americans have shown the world that might makes right, it appears the U.S. has bit off more than it can chew with this supposedly 47-year imminent threat, which is just really picking on a country that chose to fight back for the first time in a very long time. And one of the lessons that not only we are learning, but the rest of our security partners are learning, is that in the absence of soft power, 800 military bases that we have all around the world can very quickly turn into 800 separate invasions, or in the case of the Gulf nations, it can turn into missile sponges at the behest of Israel, almost overnight. And all of this is happening as the United States government has destroyed its credibility domestically with a murderous and absurd deployment of ICE as the cost of living just keeps going up and up and up. The very same tactics that we have observed in countries that we have dominated, in countries that our allies have dominated, like in occupied Palestine, are now being turned back on the domestic home front against American citizens. Masked thugs of the state, unaccountable to no one, unelected, are engaging in acts of violence against Americans with impunity. And when Americans fight back against ICE, as they did in Minneapolis, ICE shoots back. And the problems continue. The analyst Stephen Semler wrote recently that Trump's budget manages to be $361 billion larger than last year's, despite cutting $300 billion in social programs and other public investments. All of that money is going to policing, and it's going to endless war. It's not going to bridges, it's not going to tunnels, and it's certainly not going to health care. Every single one of you, regardless of your political affiliations or your ideology, should consider that money to be stolen from you. Those are dollars stolen from you to be put towards industries of death that have no future. This bargain isn't tenable anymore. It's over. It's not tenable for the employee of the California missile designer. It's not tenable for the veteran who wants free college. It's not tenable for the kids in crumbling Philadelphia schools. And it's certainly not tenable for the homeless, the working class, and of course, for the rest of the world. Those who happen to exist under the boot. We have been spoiled by an American way of life that requires so much death. The fruits of imperialism were always immoral. Now, they are obviously rotten. I don't know how else to put it. The American empire is fading fast, regardless of what we resolve here today. And I'm not just saying that so that I have an upper hand in this conversation. No matter what we say here, American empire is going to inevitably fall. But I think, as Mao Zedong himself said earlier, there is a power within the American people to change the nature of this decline. He had a lot more confidence in the American labor class than many Americans do today, I'll tell you that much. I believe that we are living through a strange and radicalizing time for millions of Americans, and I've seen that with my own two eyes. I've gone to protests all around the world, tasted the tear gas of different countries, and I've seen Barbaras and Deborahs, aged 75 and above, yelling at ICE agents in Minneapolis. The contradictions have worsened, and they are also restless. They also want that change. People intuitively understand that there is another way for the United States to exist in the world. A way in which we're not constantly exploiting people, deciding other countries' futures for them, or, say, blockading their seas because they just completely embarrassed us politically, like in the case of Cuba, holding on to old grudges for no reason as we starve economically and literally an island nation that happens to be 90 miles off of our coastline where 10 million people live. And that's happening on autopilot. It's happening even if you give no consent to that whatsoever. But we can change that. Once you see the cruelty of American empire, it's quite difficult to unsee it. And I do think American people are seeing it for the first time ever. And they know that we are getting a raw deal. The super profits that we have enjoyed are coming to an end. And our debt to humanity requires negotiating a new deal, a real, equal world peace. Empires never die quietly, and we must end the American empire regardless. But we must manage the retreat of a superpower from the world stage. This is a challenge for our time. Actually, this is the challenge for our time. Because if we do not do this, then the American empire will come to an end in a much more violent way. A curse on future generations that we must avoid at all costs. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Questions on speech? Perhaps questions? Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Well, I thank Mr. Piker for his speech. I really agree with all his points. I think that when Mr. Piker mentions that the American people are the political body from which struggle begins, I guess I want to ask Mr. Piker, how do we also square American national struggle with international struggle? What does it look like to actually have this sort of overthrow the empire be something that isn't a kind of national product?
Great question. So, from my calculation, the way I see it, as I tried to explain in this speech here, is that it's going to happen because it will collapse on its weight no matter what. It'll collapse under its weight regardless. And what I want to explain to every American that will listen is that we do have the capacity to change the system that we exist under in an effort to ensure that we have a much more equitable outcome where we don't diminish the potential of Americans and we don't diminish the potential and starve out the potential of people living in the periphery. This is something that I saw personally when I visited Cuba recently. The economic terror that we've subjected this island nation to is unforgivable. And yet the Cuban population has still thrived in very meaningful ways. They found novel cures for the lung cancer vaccine that they've had since the 90s. And I was talking to a scientist on my trip there, and apparently Cuba also has the only current working treatment for Alzheimer's and dementia. It's in stage 3 clinical trials in Canada right now as we speak. I think about what Cuba would look like if they weren't constantly under the threat of American sanctions. Because these sanctions have stifled growth. They've played a formative role in developing even further cures, right? So that's not just bad for the people of Cuba who are suffering. Their economy is in tatters. But it's also bad for people like ourselves. I mean, Alzheimer's and dementia is a massive problem. Almost all of my grandparents suffered from Alzheimer's and dementia. So the way I see it, it's almost a selfish argument to make sure that we can unlock the potential of all of these countries that we seek to dominate. And on top of that, I feel like all of the resources, all of our productive output is wasted on this unlimited, endless cycle of violence that we subject other nations to. And as soon as you connect foreign policy back to all of the domestic problems that we have, not just in the concept of blowback, which I famously have spoken about, but also the reality that every dollar that is spent on a bomb is spent on a bomb that blows up a school is a dollar that could be spent building schools here. Americans, at least in my experience, are much more responsive to that kind of message. Because at the end of the day, you don't have to use academic language or talk about the international proletarian cause. You can just tell regular folks, ordinary folks, that random person living in Tehran has the exact same interests that you and I do. They want to have shelter. They want to have a hot meal. They want a better future for their children. We're all people. So, at least in my experience, that's been a way to get ordinary Americans who've never really thought about these sorts of things to start thinking about it in these terms that dictate that we cease our senseless violence and bloodshed campaigns overseas and instead focus on ourselves. There was a guy who said that, and he won twice. His name is Donald Trump. He lied, but that's what he said. And it was successful. I hope that we can have more earnest leaders who will actually advance that cause so that we can allow the nation of the periphery to breathe, so that they can develop sovereignty and dignity for themselves, so they can unlock their potential, and that we can unlock the potential of Americans as well.
Further questions? Perhaps a question. Sure.
I'm very glad that the guest spoke about equity. I am very glad that he spoke about morality. I am slightly less glad that he spoke disapprovingly about the U.S. intervention in South Korea.
If he truly disapproves of the U.S. intervention in South Korea, what exactly about a unified communist Korea, for instance, would he find to be equitable? What about it would he find to be good, more preferable than the current capitalist?
Great question. From my assessment, I don't necessarily care about the way that other countries govern themselves. I know that we like to act as though we do. It's the basis for American intervention. It's the number one argument that we present as to why we must intervene in other countries' affairs. But it's an inherently hypocritical argument because there are plenty of countries in the world that have devastating systems, ruthless autocracies, that are formative allies of the United States, and no such intervention is ever seen as a necessity. Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, the kafala system that they have. Now, you might say this is whataboutism, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, for my estimation, the things that we did in Korea before there was such a thing as South Korea or North Korea were unbearable. Not only did we prop up a military dictatorship that was unbelievably authoritarian and unbelievably deadly, taking out any kind of socialist, trade unionist, or communist uprisings that were taking place in the South. But beyond that, what we did in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea, is tantamount to genocide. The only distinction is that it was America that did the genocide, so the rest of the world does not call it a genocide. What can you call the destruction of 90% of all standing buildings? What do you call the death and destruction, the utilization of biological and chemical weapons on the Korean population that led I believe, 10% drop-off of the entire population? It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable bloodshed. I don't know what Korea would look like in the absence of our intervention, but I can only speak to what we've done to Korea. And what we've done to Korea is incredibly violent, and for no good reason whatsoever.
Further questions? Yes. So perhaps an ultimate question.
They want to ask more. They're hissing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm inclined to agree with about 90% of Mr. Hasan's arguments. I do, however, have a question regarding when the U.S. should use its power abroad. Countries will do this as a function of sovereignty and having to maintain allies, relationships, etc. When is it right for the U.S. to intervene in, say, Ukraine or Taiwan? Should the U.S. have gotten involved in something like World War II, even though it's not our country?
It's a great question as well. I think exhausting diplomatic solutions is the most important thing that the United States should be doing in every single scenario. And once it's established that diplomacy is impossible, then I think military intervention can be reasonable. An example I'll use is not Taiwan or Ukraine, but Israel. This is why I advocate for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions from the state of Israel. 80 years of apartheid. 80 years of settler colonial violence, ethnic cleansing, mass surveillance, mass incarceration of Palestinians, robbed from their ancestral homelands with no right to return, against all international humanitarian law, against every rule in the rule book. Israel has been able to do this because they were an invaluable Cold War ally and an invaluable ally to the United States' interests in this resource-rich region. But if there was such a scenario where in the aftermath of that one phone call that Joe Biden could have made, that Donald Trump could make, that he seemingly chooses not to, be really good if he made that phone call, especially lately. What comes next would be social pariah status at the international stage. No more political cover for Israel. No more weapons to Israel. No more aid to Israel. And if that doesn't work, sanctions on Israel. Now, I'm of the mindset that it wouldn't even get to that. That's why I believe that a single phone call would probably put an end to this kind of death and destruction. But as far as our foreign adversaries goes, I think we present a lot of opportunities. We create a lot of instability around the world with our intervention, with our interventions in the affairs of other countries in an effort to constantly prod at these foreign adversaries that we've designed, rather than trying to have an equitable solution that treats these countries not as foreign adversaries, but as diplomatic partners. But in the absence of that, of course, I think military intervention would be appropriate.
Or an actually ultimate question.
Wait, I can't hear you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for his speech. I agree with him on many points, but I'm curious about his last point on the dangers of ending the American empire. What exactly does the process of ending the American empire with, as you said, preventing catastrophe for future generations look like? And is it not the case that if the American empire ends, that another global imperial power will rise?
Great question. So this is the argument that necessitates the existence of American empire, right? This is what we tell ourselves. This is what we are taught to fear. The idea that if we were to retreat from the rest of the world, other great powers would be just as ruthless to us. But the way that I think about it, as someone who's fascinated by movements of liberation throughout time, this argument has been the exact same argument time and time again. The idea that the white slaver, if they were to abolish slavery, would live in the same status in the aftermath of the abolition of slavery and be treated by the newly freed African men and women in the same way that the slaver treated them. The idea that if liberation came to countries like Algeria, or if the apartheid in South Africa was abolished, that somehow this new formation would actually punish the 10% whites in apartheid South Africa in the same way that the 10% white population has punished the black population. History has also shown us that that's not what happens. It's never happened. So the idea that other countries would treat the United States of America with the same violence that we have subjected them to has never really borne itself out. So I don't believe that that would be the case. It's a fear that many people hold on to, though, and I think that fear is what justifies, in the eyes of many Americans, the continuation of empire. Now, you asked me about trying to manage this retreat and what this catastrophic outcome would look like. I think we're living through that right now. The destruction of all previous rules of engagement, international human rights, the law of the jungle, a retreat from our previous security commitments, no longer relying on soft power initiatives. This is the death of American empire. We've now moved on to a much more vulgar form of imperialism, much more vulgar form of commanding our interests over the rest of the globe. And I think, and I hope that this is not the case, but I think that things are going to get even more violent from this point on. So that's what I'm trying to avoid. Because the reality of the matter is empires rarely die quietly. They go out over the course of sometimes centuries, but in America's case, probably a lot shorter, with increasing amounts of violence. And we're seeing that with our little sister nation, Israel, right now, going through its own fascist death spiral, not dissimilar to what the Nazis went through. I want to avoid that.
And for perhaps the briefest final question, I have a question. So the guest sort of makes this claim that the American empire is already ended, right? We don't, there's not much to do. It's in this death spiral, right? As someone who sort of wants to see this empire end, like the guest, should he just do nothing and wait for it to end? If he wants the empire to end and it is ending, what's the point of sort of doing anything politically if one can just sort of wait around and wait for it to end?
Great question. My statements are more so a warning for people. And like I mentioned, I want to manage this decline, and I want to move into the next phase of American development before it gets so totally out of hand that we see something as devastating, God forbid, as a nuclear holocaust or something. Because if the current economic organization of the American society persists, then the income inequality that we're facing is only going to worsen as wealth just stays at the top of society, and people who are from a working class background have a horrible end of that bargain, and their material conditions deteriorate even further, also accelerated by climate change too. So what I want to do is try to organize against that and to ensure that we have the most peaceful transition possible, so that we don't, so that we stop starving the potential of the masses here in the United States of America as well as elsewhere around the world.
And with that, yes, thanks. Is there perhaps
The revolution will not be televised, they say, but apparently it will be streamed live on Twitch. Mr. President, Mr. Piker, Mr. Speaker, and chat, it's a pleasure to be here as you make tonight about your empire. And I really do think that Mr. Piker gets a lot right. He gets it right that America is an empire. He gets it right that it's being problematic. But he doesn't go far enough in defining what the American empire is. What all I want to do tonight is that the U.S. empire is not just a question of territorial possessions, not just a question of military presence, nor of interventionism, but also one of technology and of finance and economics. That America has been a leader in those domains, has established a system of the rules of the game by which everyone else plays, the sign that those two are parts of its empire. The fact that almost every country in the world uses American satellites for GPS, the fact that the present food system means that it's an American created thing, created in Vermont or New Hampshire, I cannot believe. The fact that
Thank you very much. First, I'll just outline 3 reasons why. The first is that America has no homeland. Mr. Piker will assert that America has been an empire since the Spanish-American War. I say it started much earlier than that. It started with the establishment of, yes, the 13 original colonies. America has been an empire since its inception. In fact, the land we're standing on today is formed by way of violent displacement of the Quinnipiac, Paugussett, and the Wappinger peoples. Second, America is no ethno-nationalist empire. Every other empire in history has been ethno-nationalist, with the exception of Rome. The British Empire was for white Brits. The Mughal Empire was for ethnically Indian people. The Chinese empires were for people who were ethnically Chinese. America is not an ethno-nationalist empire. Finally, America is an economic, not a territorial empire. Why is this so significant? I think Mr. Piker and I would both agree that economics are the most important component of America's empire. It is capitalist incentives that draw us to this sort of downfall. And I'm really glad that he brought up the example of Guatemala. I agree that the deposition of Jacobo Arbenez, that was an economic incentive, but note the difference. It was not the case that it was a typical colonial expansion where America made Guatemala a colony. It was commercial interests. So that's the first thing I'd like to establish. But then the second thing I'd like to say, and this is where I'm in the negative, is that an American empire is greatly preferable to any other type of empire. Now, my problem with Mr. Piker's speech is that he lacks a theory of power. He lacks a theory of where power goes. Power does not evaporate. And I think it's telling that he would agree with me when he says that it was a tragedy that the USSR fell because suddenly there's a power vacuum and there were real big problems that sprouted from that. I would posit the fall of the American empire would lead to a very similar situation. Why is that important? I posit that one of 2 things would happen. Either we'd return to a system of spheres of influence, and we saw how that turned out in the early 20th century with World War I. It's a much bloodier world I'm sure we don't want to live in. And second, America could be supplanted. And I'm grateful to Ms. Perry for bringing this up in a question. Mr. Piker now claims, he says that that would never happen. He says there would be no supplanting because the historical record doesn't reflect that. But his examples, the fact that power went back to the people in South Africa, it went away from the apartheid state and towards the people, shows that power does not evaporate, it changes hands. So it's not a question of empire or no empire, it's a question of where the power is. And I posit it's much better that it's in American hands, which are covered in blood, than it's in Chinese hands or in the hands of another great power. Why is this the case? I'll posit that America gets a lot right. America gets free speech right. America gets capitalism right. America gets a lot right. The fact that we are motivated by competition above all else is the greatest virtue of this country. It means that we get an efficient economy. It has its problems, and I'll be the first to admit those. But it works a whole lot better than the Great Leap Forward, where the state says, we need to collectivize this land, and 55 million people die. Now, Mr. Piker recently made a trip to China, and he commented that this is a nation that's brought 800 million people out of poverty. That was because of reform and opening up. 改革开放. Reform and opening up to what? Reform and opening up to the system, the post-World War II system that America created. The opening up to billions of dollars in Western loans from the IMF and the World Bank. American empire has enabled these things, and while it's far from perfect, it's by far preferable. And Mr. Piker, because you like Mao so much, I'll end with a quote of his that I think you would do well to study, which is 枪杆子里面出政权. Did you get that? Did you get that? It's political power grows out the barrel of a gun. We do not want a violent world due to a power struggle when American empire falls. America has blood on its hands, but it's better for power to be in American hands than any other.
Question! Gentlemen!
Yeah.
For perhaps question, Nick Schwartz.
I just wanted to press on one of the statements you made about the ethno-nationalism question of the American empire. So other countries did have slavery. There were around before the U.S. existed. But the U.S. practiced race-based slavery, and it did it hasn't ended in some way. It's still practiced segregation. based on race, and arguably Israel does the same thing. So why would the U.S. empire stop at racism in the U.S.?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think that it's true that our racist legacy continues with us to this day. But I think there's a big difference between a racist society and an ethno-nationalist one that claims this empire is for this ethnic group, and a system which is systemically racist. I think we can all agree that we are moving in what is certainly the right direction. We are moving in the direction of civil rights. The last half century has proven exactly that. And so while I'll be the first to concede that America is not perfect, especially on race, especially when dealing with immigrants, we are not an ethno-nationalist empire.
Further questions for the gentleman? The guest.
What's the format? How do I say for the speaker? Is that how you
just ask the question?
Okay, all right, never mind. Just wanted to abide by tradition. It's been around. For the gentleman. You have somewhat of a deeply cynical, I would say, worldview about how power is supposed to continue. You did bring up an example in apartheid South Africa where the people were able to achieve liberal democracy to a certain degree. There were issues, and there's still issues in South Africa. Why do you think that the abolition of U.S. empire would create a power vacuum that creates a Chinese empire, for example, and why do you think that that system would be far more violent as opposed to an evolution just like what we saw with the American empire being a far better legacy than, let's say, monarchies that existed?
That's an excellent question. And I don't believe that when American empire falls, if it does, China will necessarily take over. But I do believe that, apparently some people do, but I do believe that power doesn't evaporate. Power is something that doesn't simply disappear, it falls into different hands. And so I think as this applies to my speech, Mr. Piker, what I would say to you is that it has to go somewhere. And again, I think one of two things will happen. Either it'll be assumed by another great power. And unfortunately, there is no better great power than America. I really wish there were. And the other alternative is that we return to a system of geopolitics, which is contingent on spheres of influence. I don't believe we should return to the time when it's kingdoms fighting each other. I think that's a much bloodier world. In an interview with Ezra Klein last week, Fareed Zakaria made the comment, former YPU president, I will comment. He made the comment that liberalism has become a victim of its own success, which is to say that liberalism has succeeded to such an extent that we have forgotten. Mr. Piker, my generation, your generation, my parents' generation, your parents' generation, hi, Mama and Dada, I hope you're watching this, which they are. We don't remember what it was like before this liberal system. We don't remember what it was like before World War II. We don't remember how bad it was. And so while I am right there with you that America has created such evil through its colonial empire, I also believe that it is far better than anything we've ever had. It's the reason why we have intellectuals like Fukuyama saying it's the end of history. It's because this is almost as nice as we've ever had it.
And with that, the gentleman is thanked. A rebuttal.
With respect, your division of the violence and imperialist brutality that America has committed and the capitalist international order that we uphold is entirely artificial and farcical. The blood on our hands was spilt in service of the liberalized capitalist international order that you so idolize. Our coups and our imperialist conquests are committed at the behest of the international corporate conglomerates that our governments serve. America is not and has never been the linchpin singeing together the democratic free world. We toppled Allende to install Pinochet in the 70s, provided financial backing to the fascist Argentinian juntas, supplied unconditional support to Yeltsin, chief architect of the modern Russian oligarchy during the Soviet collapse of the 90s, and today we bankroll the genocidal apartheid Israeli regime, playing defense in the UN for the anal gang rape of Palestinian prisoners with rusty metal holes. We have set a global historical precedent for draconian drug laws, upending entire economies with gang warfare driven by the American elite's unquenchable twin desires for coke and bloodshed. We have set back progress, combating the climate crisis that threatens the imminent annihilation of life on Earth by funneling untold billions into hydraulic fracking and deforestation of old-growth forests on federal lands. The incineration of the Amazon is in service for our appetite for beef. The Israeli state is a product of Palantir, and we sponsor the dissolution of democracy internationally through armed violent coups. And we sponsor the dissolution of society through the insidious arm of neoliberal austerity exercised in our name through the IMF and World Bank. These problems are not a product of America per se, but they are an inevitable outcropping of our status as the concentrated seat of the powers of capital on the global stage. We are their principal agents and benefactors. Our interests are their interests. This barbarous monstrosity, this regime of terror and destruction and death that we have created must be destroyed, and it must be destroyed now.
Is there perhaps a question from the much maligned? Question.
I agree. But I'm wondering if the speaker can tell me, where should the power go after? What better way of organizing power? I see the way that we can actually build a stable system post-American empire.
I find the assumption that power must necessarily concentrate in the hands of some other international dominant government to be insane. What we are striving for is not just to transfer our status as imperial global hegemon to another quote-unquote more benevolent empire. What I and what the Left Project in general is aiming for is the complete dissolution of that hierarchical system of international control, power, and economic coercion. Where power should end up and where power should resolve is in the international hands of people, of human beings, not of governments, not of corporate leaders, not of stock traders, not of the monsters who would bomb life on Earth into oblivion for another cent in their stock portfolio.
In the affirmative. The speak.
Now it's a rebuttal. Like rebuttal we do, I think.
Oh God. Hello YPU, hello chat, hello March, hello guest. Okay, so in 1961, Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican president, a five-star general, and supreme commander of the Allied forces in World War II, warned the nation that we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex, okay? He said that it would devour the resources the country needs to survive, and 65 years later, he was totally right. So, America is an empire. We've got 750 to 800 military bases across the globe, the territorial possessions from Puerto Rico to Guam, shout out, the ability to sanction any economy, bomb any country, and topple any government that we choose. The United States just approved a $1 trillion defense budget, and next year's proposal is $1.5 trillion. How are we going to pay for it? By cutting 10% of literally everything else. So, we spend more money on the military than the next 10 countries combined. That's 40% of all the military spending in the entire world. But my argument isn't just about money, it's about morality. Historian Howard Zinn documented how American expansion has always been justified by the same lie that we're spreading freedom and democracy around the world. But from the Philippines to Vietnam to Iraq, the pattern never changes. It's mass violence abroad, decay at home, and ordinary people are set to foot the bill. So, who gains and who pays? This year, Congress added $39 billion in military projects the Pentagon didn't even ask for. Why did they do it? Because of the lobbyists. This is empire. It's a wealth transfer from the working class paychecks to defend military contractor shareholders. So, there are currently 46 active armed conflicts right now, which is the most since World War II, by the way. We've spent $8 trillion on the world on terror, and what do we have to show for it? The world is severely less stable than it ever has been before, and this is the fault of the American empire. So, moving on to who's paying, let's look at the kid in Mississippi whose school can't afford textbooks while the nearest military base next door gets $500 million in expansion money. The veteran, poisoned by burn pits, denied care while defense contractors produce record-breaking profits. However, and having said that, money isn't the real issue. Even if we taxed the wealthy and funded both empire and society, empire would still be wrong because empire means domination. It means killing people who have done nothing to us, including our fellow US citizens. On to the impacts. From an environmental perspective, the US military is the single largest institutional producer and consumer of fossil fuels on the planet at 270,000 barrels of oil a day. And that's for routine operations during peacetime, not even at wartime. That's more emissions than 140 countries combined. And we, the people, are told to recycle, take shorter showers, buy EVs. The onus is put on the individual to change the world. Meanwhile, a single military refueling tanker burns more fuel in one flight than the average American does in 40 years. We sacrifice, they indulge. So, the military burns oil to protect access to oil, which funds more military spending. It's a self-reinforcing cycle of extraction and violence. Our business models cycle and sustain themselves on death tolls. And from a lives perspective, Brown University's cost of war projected that we tracked a human toll. So the deaths of post 9/11 wars have killed 4.5 million people and displaced 38 million people. And the empire doesn't deliver the stability that it promises. Every intervention creates blowback. We've armed the Mujahideen, we got Al-Qaeda. We toppled Saddam, we got ISIS. We are the ones perpetuating these conflicts because perpetual war is profitable for the elites. And the negative says, like, be glad it's the American empire rather than somebody else's, but at the same time, this is a false choice. The choice isn't between, like, American empire versus Chinese, it's between domination and cooperation. China's power is economic, and mutual destruction isn't in anyone's best interest. So the power vacuum fear comes from, like, the idea that somebody must dominate, but that's an imperial mindset. Most of the world doesn't yearn for American or Chinese hegemony. They want multilateral cooperation where no single country has power or autonomy over them. And that world is possible, we're just blocking it. So, what is the world of the alternative? Empire undermines rule-based international order, replacing it with war of one against all. You can't champion international law while bombing whoever you want, and you can't demand others to follow the rules that you don't follow yourself. Most of the world already wants multilateral cooperation, we're just undermining it, because we are the ones withdrawing from climate agreements, we're the ones vetoing UN resolutions, we sanction International Criminal Court. Instead, we ought to work towards diplomacy before bombs, strengthen our international institutions, create trade agreements that benefit workers, and use the trillions that we save into investments at home and abroad. So, with that being said, America's founding promise was self-governance, and empire betrays that promise. Every dollar spent on defense is a dollar taken from a public school. Eisenhower was right. In the empire, fund the future.
Or perhaps a penultimate question, Mr. Moe.
I thank the lady for her speech. I guess the question is, with this framing that America is the country that introduces, this desire for domination without the U.S. We all hold hands and live together and be really happy. I mean, it's really nice. Everyone claps. It makes me so happy. But I mean, does the lady, and maybe, I'm asking kind of as a proxy of Hasan, but I mean, how do they do Chinese numbers on the South China Sea? How do they do efforts to take over Taiwan? How do they do efforts to ensure so, okay, the U.S. goes away, and all these are fine because it's under, like a communist government. Like, I mean, do we just dissolve all governments and then we all live together and then no more of this? Like, where does it end?
So what I'm saying, it's not like militaries won't exist. I'm advocating for like regional partnerships. Like we aren't the ones, America shouldn't be the answer to like what's happening in the South China Sea. I think Japan, Australia, South Korea, Southeast Asia, they can form their own partnerships like through diplomacy or what have you.
Further questions for the lady, or perhaps a final question. I have another question. I only got two debates up there. So the lady sort of makes the claim that there is an alternative to like domination, and it's cooperation. One of the sort of big issues with sort of international bodies that seems to me is that there is like not sort of cultural cohesion, right? I.e. some things that seem like totally incompatible for us are part of the cultures of other countries. How does she reckon we sort of work through that in this idea of cooperation? Do we sort of ignore the issues on which we have cultural differences, or will we eventually sort of coalesce around one global culture?
I don't think it's necessarily advocating for a global culture, like people can have their own cultures, what have you. I think it's just about diplomacy and what our guest said, like diplomacy, 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 till the last, like that, as far as we can go, rely on that rather than, us unilaterally deciding what the world can and cannot do.
And with that, the lady is thanked. Motion!
Okay. We go back up to I move we thank Ms. M.J. Joseph for a 5-minute speech on the floor of the building.
Is there perhaps a second docketed speech in the negative?
For the speech.
The speech.
Sorry to everyone that missed Ben & Jerry's free ice cream day. So thank you. I missed it. I'm pretty sad I missed it. Okay. We on the left need to say something that too many of us have become afraid to say. America is worth loving. Yes, America has flaws. Serious ones. I'm one of the biggest critics of my country and I will continue to be. We should be honest how we treat the poor, how gun crimes ravage our communities, and the lack of health care. But call out the hypocrisy that exists in the gap between our reality and our ideals, but never forget that we're still better than any of the countries supposedly under our empire, not just the alternatives to our empire. My mom was born and raised in India. She loved learning and reading and writing. She scored at the top of her class in school. But when it came time to college, my grandmother thought it would be more fitting for a woman to get married and learn the trades of a wife rather than allow her to pursue her dreams at college. She was married off to my dad, who she did not meet until our wedding day. He happened to be a good man, many others were not so lucky. So what should we say to this? My grandmother was wrong. The culture which taught her this was wrong. The government which did not stop that and even incentivize it was wrong. And this is what so many of us on the left are so afraid to say. We are so obsessed with classifying everything in terms of hegemonic power structures that we fall into the worst form of relativism, one in which we can no longer recognize evil. We think of the world in terms of such a binary. The West are the oppressors and everyone else is the oppressed. But in doing so, we romanticize and fetish the evil of these regimes simply because they are anti-Western. I respect you a lot, man, but Stalin dead has killed 20 million people. Look at Iran. It is not some like innocent, misunderstood regime. It's a regime that killed 30,000 of its citizens just because they protested. It is a regime that has backed terrorists that have intentionally killed thousands of civilians. It's a regime that has allowed women to be stoned for committing adultery. Or look to Venezuela and Cuba that are so corrupted by cartels that they're basically narco states. They deny their citizens basic necessities. They jail and kill dissidents and only look out for those in power. You may oppose intervention for practical reasons, fine. People can disagree about what can be done and what costs are bearable. But do not delude yourselves into thinking that these people are free or that they are living great lives. Do not tell yourselves women beaten into silence or dissidents being thrown into prison just need more time to work things out on their own. The least we owe them is honesty. There is no hope for these people outside of America. Their regimes will continue to repress them while enriching their leaders. The lady before me asked for regional partnerships. A regional partnership with Iran and Lebanon going to free like the Iranians? And the rest of the international community will continue to turn a blind eye, whether in Israel or Palestine or in Armenia and Azerbaijan. The only solution is an American one. I agree with the lady before me that the American imperial project is inherently corporatist, but how do we solve that? I think Mr. Piker has said before, elect someone other than J.D. Vance or Gavin Newsom. That's the solution. Not to get rid of American power wholly, but to make ourselves better. So criticize America all you want, I will too. But do not insult the people who flee these places by pretending their chains are beautiful. There's a reason my parents came to America. They were offered a promise, and though this promise is far from fulfilled, at least we're trying. My mom got her community college degree here in 2012, and she hopes that I will have a daughter one day to realize her dreams. So know the difference between a country that fails its ideals and regimes that do not even have those ideals. The left has room for patriotism. So while I have a little bit of time left, and it's my last speech at Union, I just want to say a few words about Rick Scott, who proves again that conservatives don't believe in free speech, or just conservatives. I condemn Mr. Piker's statements on political violence, just as I condemn Mr. Scott's colleague from Georgia who said that Obama should be hanged or that Pelosi should be shot. I condemned him just as I condemned the January 6 rioters who committed actual violence and was summarily pardoned by Mr. Scott's party. But here is the difference. I still believe that Mr. Piker and Ms. Green should be allowed to speak here. Because in America, unlike in Iran or Venezuela, dissent is not supposed to mean censorship or silencing. In this country, when we hear ideas we disagree with, we do not respond by saying that the state should shut it down. We respond by arguing, by vehemently debating. We respond by listening, persuading, debating bad ideas in the open. This is the fundamental ethos of the First Amendment and part of what makes this country extraordinary. And a group of college students seems to understand that better than the senator, because we do it every Tuesday at the Yale Political Union. So Senator Scott, you're free to rage about college students on Twitter and threaten our funding, but never again pretend to be a champion of free speech. Thank you.
Questions for Denver? The guest.
Oh, I get special privileges?
Yeah, bro.
Okay. Great speech.
Thank you.
You brought up that Venezuela and Cuba were narco states. Not exactly sure where you got that information from. I think it was Donald Trump who said Venezuela was a narco state, and then he dropped it. Or at least the Southern District of New York dropped it. The FBI did, because there wasn't enough evidence for it. But beyond that, you talked about free speech at the end of your speech. It's a value that I also believe in, and maybe even sometimes exhaust. But I also believe that free speech has been taken away from Americans time and time again, especially throughout times of war. Eugene Debs famously was jailed for being a conscientious objector. We've interned Japanese people living on U.S. soil during World War II We've assassinated leaders of the Black Panther Party, of the Black Panther movement. These are all direct violations of free speech, both for domestic concerns and at times when America's power around the globe is felt threatened. Now, do you feel like free speech is inherent to American liberal democracy, number one? Do you feel like social liberalism is only compatible with American imperial hegemony, and if so, why? And last but not least, what do you say to the argument that we are losing what remains of our free speech right now directly as a consequence of America's power waning on the global stage because empire does feel threatened?
So I think your first question was like free speech and relation to liberal democracy. So I agree. I think like I'm one of the big ones that like condemns like the Americans who like jailed in the Red Scare and all those things. I actually think that like we're actually pretty good at like protecting actual free speech right now. I don't think people are actually like jailed or anything. I think like one of the most dangerous attacks on free speech is a sort of more like institutional one, like the ones that's happening in like schools all over, like the South, for example, where you can't teach critical race theory. But once again, like I think one of my main points is that like this sort of free speech is like I think unique and like even unique to like America compared to the rest of the West. For example, the UK, where like they can like censor anything. But I think the state of free speech in America is certainly I think way better than anywhere else. Your second question, is social liberalization only compatible with American imperial hegemony? Currently, yes. Currently, yes. It's like we are the only ones at the global. Like you look to our partners in Europe, look to anybody that's like advancing any idea of like social liberalism. Yeah, there are like some like dissents in like some of these countries themselves, but I actually think like the strongest voices are the people right here in America, and those are like the left. And I think like we gotta win this election 2028. That's how we solve it. I forget your third question.
It was just Venezuela and Cuba being narco states. Where you got that information from?
So I mean, once again, I'm not like the greatest like expert on like cartels, but I'm pretty sure, for example, like I can't tell you specific research for you, but like I'm pretty sure Cuba, for example, is like makes a significant amount of money as like a middle point between like South American cartels and like America, and it's like planes take off from there, and there is like some evidence that like the government has cooperated. Same, I think, similar in Venezuela. That's what I'd say. I think it's like wrong to sort of like say that they haven't cooperated at all with some of these cartels. Yeah.
For perhaps a final question, Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Oh, thank you for your indulgence. So I would agree with the gentleman and my classmate on
See you tomorrow.
About certain states maybe being better than others we live in. But my question is more about empire as a choice. Yeah. America being an empire is a hard power choice. It's something that multiple other states may cause a definite discussion around the world. And I would think that America may be great, but do we need to impose our greatness in violence? Does a shiny city on a hill need to burn down other cities to make them?
So on violence, I think one of the like tough parts of me giving this speech is that like I'm like a struggling pacifist, but then I also have like trouble like largely like thinking about history like World War II. But I do think there has to be like some level of imposition, right? That like these things aren't going to solve themselves, and I think that's like part of my point. It's that like Iran isn't like I actually think like revolution is like now impossible. You can't like resist states anymore. Like military technology has gone like way too advanced. Like the only way I think is external, and I think to be honest, the only hope for like a lot of these countries is the American people. So go vote 2028.
And with that, the gentleman is thanked. Is there perhaps a third docketed speech in the affirmative?
For the speech!
Speech!
There's one more.
Mr. Speaker, today I stand before you wearing all black for two reasons. One of those reasons is due to your resolution, because I fear we cannot argue about whether to slaughter an already dead empire. An empire is not defined by territory, especially in a world that is so wrought with globalization. Rather, empires are defined by their dependencies. If a state becomes structurally and asymmetrically reliant on another for culture and tradition, security, or economic survival, they are integrated within this larger empire. For example, if I'm a sovereign state that adopts American cultural traditions, receives protection through military bases, and relies on exporting goods to American soil, then I am one with the American empire. But there is one thing that those who have and will speak on the stage have gotten terribly wrong, Mr. Speaker. Empires are inherently good. When conflicts can be simplified down to in-groups and dehumanized out-groups, forcing other nations under one in-group is bound to reduce out-group villainization, dehumanization, and conflict. Without this coordination, power fragments, and struggle for domination wreaks havoc upon this now vacuum. An empire can stabilize trade, reduce conflict, and establish greater order and allow for greater lived meaning in a multicultural world. The world needs dominance for peace, and if this is a sort of utopic end, then certainly the ends justify the means. There is one condition, though. An empire is only legitimate if it is directed towards a clear and coherent end, preferably one that maximizes collective human good, but empire can be legitimate without. What an empire does require for legitimacy, though, is for its actions to push towards this coherent end. And, for a time, the American empire met this condition. Initially with the Monroe Doctrine, and then later with policies in the post-war period like the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine, America drove towards clear ends of democracy, social mobility, and containment of totalitarianism. But today, it has failed. It does not fail because it lacks power, but it fails because it no longer knows what this power is for. What are America's ends now, I ask this union? The issue is not that America has no direction. It is that it's attempting to pursue incompatible ones. The American empire still holds claim to its original ends, but it now directly contradicts that through maintaining strategic control over global regions like the Middle East, supporting allies and instigating regime changes, often promoting its own influence over eventual democratic outcomes. This is not covered under this ends justify the means philosophy, because these are competing priorities that are fundamentally incompatible. After all, control, by definition, limits autonomy. So, it is not that America has no end, but rather the presence of multiple incompatible ends at once. An empire with many ends has no ends at all. America no longer has a strong enough national identity to consolidate a single direction, and without that, its actions lose meaning. We see this contradiction clearly in practice. The American empire was built on the idea of a melting pot, a nation defined not by exclusion, but by openness and integration. But today, Mr. Speaker, even within its own borders, that identity is contested. Immigration is no longer a shared ideal, but a point of polarization within our political climate. And when there is that level of internal conflict, this empire cannot export an end that it no longer believes in itself. And on a global scale, this lack of coherence breaks down the very system empire is supposed to create. Where a strong empire organizes its subject states, an illegitimate one doesn't halt the in-group, out-group conflict, and instead serves as just another force in the mix that can be seen with Middle Eastern conflicts today. And when an empire loses its coherent end, its means no longer serve a purpose beyond themselves. What was once a path towards stability becomes a system of permanent control and just a lifeline for the Americas to stay kicking. The ends once justify the means, but now there are no ends left to justify them. So why not reform? Why not just realign the system? Because the American empire cannot regain a coherent end without abandoning the very structure that makes it an empire. If America chooses democracy as its end, it must obtain control over allies and regions, which dissolves dependency and the empire ends. But if it chooses control as its end, it must abandon democratic legitimacy, which destroys credibility entirely. In either case, the current system cannot survive. Ending the American empire does not mean chaos. All it means is abandoning a system of domination that no longer has direction, and letting American cultural, political, and economic presence fade. It means recognizing that power must be tied to a coherent, intelligible end if it's to remain legitimate. And thus, the danger is not that American empire ends. Thank you. The danger is not that American empire... Oh, that's one sentence. Okay. The danger is that it continues as a system that has lost its purpose, and in doing so undermines the very order it once claimed to preserve. And with that, I yield.
Isn't this supposed to be affirmative?
Yes. Questions for the gentleman. Or perhaps a question. Mr. Geffen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I think this is also like a really interesting speech. I have a fun one at that. I'm interested in like the sustainability of the system he outlines. He says like an empire must have like sort of like one end. But it seems like to me that an empire naturally wants to dominate more, wants to take more, wants to have multiple ends. And it kind of like pushes into having multiple ends and then becomes unsustainable. It seems like to me this is a process of empire. Like how does the man, like the gentleman reconcile that? Is it like possible to have like a sustainable long-term empire with just one end?
I think that's actually a really good question because it can be shown with a lot of empires in the past that they start off with this clear goal, they dominate for it, but then eventually over time they start splitting, they start gaining competing factions, and then eventually they fall. So, I mean, I think America is already in this downward spiral, but I would like to hope that in an ideal empire, that there is one that is able to stick with their ends with either a strong enough constitution or leadership that keeps the same ideals through generations, which I know is very highly unlikely, but at least that is what the ideal empire would be like.
For perhaps a penultimate question, Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This presents this idea that empires, in order to have meaning, have to have one particular goal, and he describes which goals are good. But have any empires throughout history actually had one particular goal? They seem to be motivated by a variety of different factors, by freedom and fighting communism and other geopolitical ends. Can we actually obtain the standard that the gentleman describes?
So by one coherent end, I don't mean we're picking between democracy and the containment of totalitarianism. I mean like one set framework. But I do understand where the gentleman's coming from, and I honestly don't think any empire has really reached this at this point, because what other empires besides the American Empire, and perhaps the Chinese Empire, do we have really existing today?
And for perhaps a final question, the senior sometime speaker at Yale.
So, empires opt to employ ends to certain, or means to certain ends. So I'm curious what, kinds of means are justifiable. For example, if an empire deems a certain group subversive to its own ends, a group that makes up a sizable portion of its population, would something like a mass extinction or a mass termination or like a mass disenfranchisement of this group ever be justified? Because with the way that the gentleman posits his view of empire, it seems like this is a reasonable option. So
we're about to unveil liberal Hitler.
Absolutely. So I did have one line that was basically clear, coherent, and preferred, one that maximizes collective human good. So, I mean, the empire, if it does those actions that the gentleman is saying, then then it could be a legitimate empire, but it's certainly not a good empire.
And with that, the gentleman is thanked. Is there perhaps a final docketed speech in the negative? Speak.
So we'll have this, and then also the closing remarks. You don't have to say for the speech, just go up there. And those can be short.
Mm-hmm. No questions on him?
Yeah, him?
Yeah.
No, it's all. But yeah, no questions for you.
Oh, okay.
One day, the young people of today will inherit America. We grew up hearing that our country was strong and special. We heard stories of our founders that taught us that this country meant something, that it was more than just land, more than just an economy. We were supposed to be the nation of liberty, of builders, a nation of industry where those who worked hard succeeded. But we now stand to inherit an America that is not that. Our political machine has given us back-to-back senile presidents. Our president desecrates Easter on Easter. We still don't know what's going on with Epstein, but it isn't good, and it involves a lot of people. We have a Congress that's bought out that 80% of Americans disapprove of. That's our leadership. And what fruits has it bore? The economy has been rigged. We believed in hard work, now we gamble on sports and cryptocurrency. We're short 27 million affordable homes. We have no bullet trains. China has 30,000 miles of them. And our cities cede their public spaces to people zombified by fentanyl. Our house is not in order. And what about internationally? That's the subject of this debate. We have to watch on that runway in Afghanistan while our allies chase a C-17 down the runway. We watch them cling to the side while it takes off. Those people believed in our values, and look what happened to them. And now we have this entanglement in Iran. We've done a surprise attack like cowards. We never used to do those as a matter of principle. We've accomplished none of our goals 6 weeks in, and now we are considering their 10-point plan. So how can the proud American look at the state of our country today and feel anything but humiliation? And what was the point of it all? Cheap gas? Gas isn't even cheap. So I agree that we've got problems, but now we have this idea that's coming from Mr. Piker and other people on the left that we just need to maim America. We just need America to just shrivel up so it can't do any more damage to the world. And I hear this idea. It's so weak. It's so convenient because it doesn't require fixing anything or having solutions for our country's problems. Our national mission, the mission of Washington, of Hamilton, of Lincoln, has been subverted from the inside. It's been subverted by the rise of so many who desire nothing more than to skip off the top. People who see our country as an economic zone and think in terms of quarters and election cycles instead of decades. The abuse of our power abroad is just one part of our problem. We've lost that great civilizational gravity that built our power in the first place. We've lost the American difference in industry, in economy, in our standard of living. The American dream, essentially. And so to the rest of the world, we are not that city on the hill anymore. And so we replace that influence with the influence of bombs and drone strikes. But this smash and grab domestic situation and our disastrous foreign policy are both coming from the same place. The lobbyists, the super PACs, their donors, the defense contractors, they're eating our country. And so that's a hard problem to solve. We'll probably have to reform our elections. We'll probably have to reform our bureaucracy, revive antitrust and consumer protections, federalism, and so much more. But this idea that the solution is just to retreat from the world, I don't buy it. It's giving up. Maiming our stature will not fix congressional corruption. It won't solve the housing shortage. It won't fix our infrastructure. It won't rebuild faith in our country. But I have hope that we can once again achieve that civilizational gravity that we long for. That if we rise to the occasion, as we have so many other times in our history, and if America is renewed, not only in strength and power, but also in our values and beliefs, then we can be a force for good in the world. We profess our values today but fail to uphold them, but how many more refuse to even acknowledge them? The world of this weak, retreating America is not a good place, and the world of a renewed, focused, strident America is a better one. we do not have to accept anything less than what we know this country can be. I yield to questions.
Questions for the gentleman. Or perhaps a question, Mr. Miranda-Blas.
Thank you for the indulgence. You know, Mr. Speaker, I'm hearing a lot of I, me, America. You know what I'm not hearing a lot about? The American Empire. As someone who is, ready for it, from Puerto Rico. As someone who is a subject of the empire, why should I be compelled to care what is happening in the United States? Why should I care what the United States is doing when they are still in my country, exploiting my economy and taking advantage of a capitalist economy that the United States has imposed upon us and that is being imposed upon other countries as well? Why should those countries be okay with this continued foreign policy? Why should the focus specifically be on what is good for America? If we were talking about the American Empire, writ large, you know, that thing.
Well, certainly I don't think that our foreign policy should continue as it's been. That definitely is not a part of my argument. But to respond to the broader question, the point is that an America that lives by the values of the Declaration of Independence, an America that truly stands for what we say, is good for the world. And so that's why you should care. That's why people around the world do care what happens in our country.
Further questions? Perhaps a penultimate question. Ms. Abdul-Kahan?
A tension between maintaining a presence in the world and fixing all the internal issues that the gentleman mentioned. You know, housing, the fact that the budget is a thing. Can you continue spending as much money sending moms abroad and maintaining this empire abroad when you have such a plethora of issues that the gentleman listed out? Is it not more morally consistent to retreat and to handle all the issues that the gentleman became so fascinating?
There is tension between spending $1.5 trillion on the military, as has been proposed, and fixing our domestic problems. But I don't propose that we spend $1.5 trillion on the military. But I do propose that we continue, as we hopefully reform and restore our country, having a place in the world, having the ability to project influence. And so there can be tension between the things that we do in pursuit of an empire and the things that we seek to do at home. But there is also a way to achieve both at the same time, I believe.
And for perhaps the briefest final questions. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as we know, the sort of world system is some sort of jungle system. There's no overarching enforcement mechanism for acting altruistically. So why would the United States ever act that way? Why wouldn't it just revert to acting in its own interest?
Well, if you don't believe that our country is special, or you don't believe that there's anything here, then that would be a cynical viewpoint that one could adopt. But that's not what I would ever want to see from our country. That's not what I would ever propose or support.
And with that, gentlemen, thank you. Are there perhaps closing remarks from the guest?
Yes. Good. Do I say forward to the speech again?
You can just go.
All right. Wow. That was incredible. A lot of wonderful speeches I heard today. And some maybe not so wonderful. I did, however, hear a lot of American exceptionalism. I heard a lot of liberal chauvinism and an overall fear of the unknown, a fear of the enemy that we've designed in our minds. That is what justifies Western imperialism in the minds of many, so it's expected. But I just wanted to say thank you for all your wonderful and thoughtful contributions today. I want to make this short and sweet. 100 years ago, liberalism was failing. There was tremendous conflict on the European continent. 100 years later, with the exception of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, let's be real, it would be unthinkable to assume that Germany would fight against France, or that France would fight against England. Why? Because there's collaboration. Capitalism has robbed us of our humanity. We assume endless greed is the nature of man. But while greed has played a formative role in developing Western society, so has collaboration. We look to these institutions that we've built. We look to skyscrapers, the invention of the internet. Maybe that was not so good. Although it did give me a job, so I have to be grateful. And we assume this is a byproduct of capitalism, a byproduct motivated by man's greed, the profit incentive. All of these institutions, whether it be skyscrapers, whether it be our infrastructure, was also built with labor, with collective action. It is our choice at the end of the day to focus on one over the other. We can make that choice to no longer be greedy. We can make that choice to no longer exercise that selfishness. And we can make that choice to engage in collaboration with many of you, I believe, regardless of your ideological background, would probably agree that Donald Trump is forcing us to retreat from that collaborative nature, whether it's for good or for evil. But ultimately, it is that wanting that each and every one of you has to collaborate with others that I believe that we can, no matter what happens next, find a much more just and equitable future. And the only way we can do that is through organizing. One of the first speakers, I forget your name, had some interesting words to say, that there's always going to be power. I say we put the power back in the hands of the many, rather than the power in the hands of the few. If a dictatorship is inevitable, I'd rather have it be a dictatorship of the proletariat than one that is designed around the needs of the bourgeois class. And on that note, thank you so much for having me today. Look forward to seeing yourself on place.
Appropriate motion. The motion, the chair.
I have the previous question.
No, let's see if something I figure it out.
I move we thank the guy.
Hearing seconds and no objections, the guest is so thanked. Is there now perhaps an appropriate motion?
I move the previous question. Second.
Hearing seconds and no objections, we will now come to a vote. Floor leaders, please come to the front. Per the Union Constitution, please only raise your hand to vote if you are a member of one of our 7 parties. All those members of the Union of the resolution, please raise your hand. Members of the Union.
Oh, yeah. I vote for the...
All those members of the Union in the negative of the resolution, please raise your hand.
Ooh.
I think upstairs is well.
Oh.
Yeah, that way.
Yeah. All those abstaining. By a vote of 54 to 31 to 3, this motion passes. Is there perhaps a final appropriate motion? Mr. Gant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move we adjourn.
There are seconds and no objections. It is so moved.
Mr. Piker, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Pleasure to meet you as well.
Nice to meet you.
Happen just trying to get us to adjourn.
Just two?
Okay, we have to. Thank you. Let's get a. We're taking a photo.
You want to take a photo?
If we can shut it down, let's get
Oh, there you go.
Thank you. What is this for, USA Today?
Yes, sir. You're doing an interview with us.
Oh, yeah, I am, yeah.
You're right.
All right. Yep.
Yeah, I have it in my pocket.
We're going to take a picture.
1 second.
Yeah.
Let me just give this to Marge.
Yeah, you got it.
There you go.
We're going to go to our events. Or should we just go to the event?
Yeah, no, I'll meet the people. I mean, it's going to be crazy, but...
I'm looking to get in frame model by you in that picture.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
It's a pleasure. Nah, it's chill.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, we'll talk at the event. Okay. All right. More. When do we need to go to the event?
As soon as Mr. Piker is
Okay. Just let me know. I'm going to...
Okay. The event is dinner, right, or something?
We do have a charcuterie.
Okay. Cool. What's up? Nice to meet you. You guys were incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant, both of you.
Can we take a picture?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Okay,
of course.
great. Stay well.
What's going on? Nice to meet you.
Oh, yeah.
Wait, is Raymond?
Do you want me to stand like in between everybody? How do we want to do it?
Yeah, I think so.
Wait.
It's going to be tough.
MJ
Okay. First, let's do just us three. Is that what you want to do? Wait, first I'm going to do just with them two, and then with everybody, okay?
Wait. Party.
Yes.
All right, get it.
Okay. Party.
What a fun display. God damn.
Don't fall.
Yeah, careful.
You know what?
Hit that 0.5, Doug.
Yeah, I'll get that 0.5.
Height mog in my case.
All right. 3, 2, 1, revolution! Amazing. Putting it left.
All right, nice to meet you guys.
Thanks, man. Great to meet you.
Thank you for being here.
Yes.
Wow. What an event, huh, Chad? Did you guys enjoy it?
We had fun.
It was good. They had fun. I couldn't check.
Very quick selfie.
Yeah, of course. Let's do it. What's up?
Amazing.
Nice to hear that. Thank you.
Also, yeah, thanks for coming. Usually we get like a bunch of like.
What's going on? Thank
It's been all right-wing guests this semester, so.
I bet you none of them.
Like, I don't know, like a minute.
I bet you it didn't. That didn't cause. Oh hell yeah! I bet you that didn't cause half the controversy of me coming,
Well,
right?
Well, Rick Scott came too, and no one.
Yeah, I know. Because no one cares about Rick Scott.
No,
that's true.
Yeah.
He came when I was speaker. So.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
We also had the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah. Well, that was early this semester. So. Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Whoever, quick. Because I gotta go.
Yeah. All right.
Let me send this to the